They say the only way 3 people can keep a secret is if 2 of them are dead. Well, as of Tuesday morning, Miller is dead. A massive heart attack took him in his sleep, leaving him cold in that ragged armchair he loved so much. And the thing downstairs, the prisoner we've kept locked in the concrete dark for 38 years, he isn't talking to anyone. That leaves me. Just me. And I don't have much time left. Looking out the window through the rain, I can see the headlights of the black SUVs parked just at the edge of the property line. They're waiting. They're waiting for the probate period to end, waiting to come in and tear this place apart. They know Miller is gone. And I think they finally know what we found in the woods back in '87. I'm recording this tape because the world needs to know the truth before they erase it. Before they erase me. We didn't kill the monster. We didn't let it go. We did something much, much worse. We saved it. My name is Jack. In another life, I was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, 1st Recon. My partner, Sergeant Miller, God rest his stubborn soul, was the only man I ever trusted with my life. When we came back from the jungle in '72, we didn't fit in anymore. The noise of the city, the politics, the polite society, it all felt fake. We carried a darkness that civilized people couldn't understand. So we came here, the deepest, most unforgiving foothills of the Oregon Cascades. We wanted to disappear. We wanted peace. Miller bought this land for dirt cheap because the locals said it was cursed. At the diner in town, they talked in hushed tones about the hairy man who stole children and snapped elk necks like dry twigs. We laughed at them. We were combat veterans. We had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and spat in the devil's eye. We weren't afraid of ghost stories. We were the monsters the forest should have been afraid of. But 3 days ago, when I found Miller cold in this room, the first thing I felt wasn't grief. It was panic. Pure, freezing panic. Because Miller was the meticulous one. Miller was the one who had the combination to the complex air filtration system we built. Miller was the one who knew the exact feeding schedule to keep the creature calm. Miller was the warden. I was just the relief guard. Now I'm holding a heavy ring of rusted iron keys. Keys to a cage that holds the most significant biological discovery in human history. A discovery that has been breathing, eating, and waiting in a retrofitted Cold War bunker under this cabin since the Reagan administration. I have to go down there. I have to face him alone for the first time. But before I do, you need to understand how this happened. You need to understand why 2 men, sworn to uphold the Constitution, decided to commit a felony that has lasted 4 decades. It didn't start with malice. It started with a hunting trip on a rainy October night. It started with a mistake. It was late October 1987. I remember the date because the air smelled like rotting pine needles and ozone, a scent that always reminds me of the day my life split into before and after. The woods were wet with that specific kind of relentless Oregon rain. A cold, gray mist that doesn't just soak your clothes. It soaks through your skin and settles deep into your marrow. It wakes up every old injury you ever had. For me, it was the shrapnel scar on my left thigh. For Miller, it was just the cold ache of existence. We weren't out there looking for monsters. Back then, if you mentioned the word Sasquatch to Sergeant Miller, he wouldn't just laugh. He'd look at you with that 1,000-yard stare and ask if you'd forgotten your meds. We were practical men. We were tracking a bear. At least that's what the evidence suggested. Something had been coming down from the ridge for 3 weeks straight, tearing through Miller's perimeter fence like it was made of wet tissue paper. It had ripped the steel door off his generator shed and mauled 2 of his hunting dogs. It wasn't eating them, though. That was the strange part. It just broke them. Like a child breaking a toy he didn't want anymore. We decided to handle it ourselves. We didn't call the sheriff, and we sure as hell didn't call Fish and Game. In our minds, we were still operating under the old rules of engagement. Identify the threat. Neutralize the threat. Go home. Miller was the tracker. He moved through that dense undergrowth with a grace that defied his size. He had eyes like a hawk and a patience that bordered on psychopathic. We were about 5 miles deep into the ridge, in a chaotic tangle of geography the locals called Devil's Staircase. It was rough terrain, no trails, just ancient moss-covered Douglas firs that blocked out the sky and a silence so heavy it felt pressurized. It wasn't the peaceful silence of nature. It was the terrified silence of a forest that knows a predator is walking through it. We found the perfect kill zone near a narrow ravine where the game trails converged. Miller stopped, kneeling in the mud, and ran his hand over a patch of crushed ferns. He looked up at me, rain dripping from the brim of his boonie hat, and whispered, "Whatever this is, Jack, it's heavy. Look at the compression depth. This isn't a 300-pound black bear. We're dealing with a grizzly." Miller had the idea to dig a pit. Old habits die hard. We didn't have bear traps big enough for what we imagined, and we didn't want to sit in a blind and risk a bad shot in the dark. We wanted to contain it. It took us 2 grueling days of digging in the freezing mud to get it deep enough, 8 feet down, 6 feet wide. The clay was thick and heavy, sticking to our shovels like glue. We worked in shifts, sweating inside our ponchos, fueled by black coffee and the kind of unspoken focus we hadn't shared since the war. We didn't use spikes at the bottom. That's an important detail. We weren't trying to torture the animal. We just wanted to trap it. The plan was simple: trap it, then decide whether to call for relocation or put a .308 round behind its ear if it was too dangerous. We covered the gaping mouth of the pit with a lattice of weak branches, moss, and a layer of pine needles. It was a masterpiece of field engineering, a textbook tiger trap, hidden perfectly in the forest floor. Then we waited. The sun went down around 5 p.m., and the forest turned into a wall of black ink. We sat in the tree stand about 20 feet up, bolted to the trunk of a massive cedar. We sat there for 6 hours, motionless. The rain pattered against our ponchos, a steady, hypnotic rhythm. I could hear Miller's breathing beside me. Slow, steady, controlled. We were hunters again, the years falling away, the gray hair irrelevant. We were back in the bush. Around 3 hours, the rhythm of the forest changed. The crickets stopped. The owls went silent. Even the wind seemed to die down. Then we heard it. It wasn't the quadrupedal shuffle of a bear. It wasn't the erratic trot of an elk. It was a stride, a heavy, rhythmic, 2-legged stride. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause, crunch. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, rigid as wire. I looked at Miller. Even in the pitch black, illuminated only by the faint gray light of the moon behind the storm clouds, I saw his eyes go wide. He shifted his weight, the wood of the tree stand creaking softly. He mouthed one word to me, barely a breath. "Man?" My mind raced. A poacher? A logger lost in the dark? If a human fell into that pit, they could break their neck. I raised my Winchester .308, clicked the safety off with a metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I opened my mouth to yell, "Stop!" But then the clouds broke. For just 3 seconds, a beam of moonlight cut through the canopy and hit the clearing. The thing standing at the edge of our trap. It wasn't a man, and it sure as hell wasn't a bear. It was immense, a mountain of muscle and shadow, easily 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, covered in matted dark fur that seemed to absorb the light. It stood upright, fully bipedal, proud. It turned its head, scanning the wind, and I saw the silhouette of a conical head sitting directly on the shoulders with no neck. I couldn't breathe. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. Miller was frozen beside me, his rifle forgotten in his lap. The creature took one step too many. The lattice of branches gave way with a sickening snap. Gravity took over. The creature fell. But the sound it made, that's the sound that wakes me up in the middle of the night, 38 years later. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a growl. It was a scream. A deeply human-sounding scream of shock, fear, and pain. Gwar-hur. It sounded like a man, a giant prehistoric man, screaming for his life. It echoed off the canyon walls like a siren. Then came the heavy thud of impact, followed by a whimper. A high-pitched, pathetic whimper. The adrenaline hit us both at once. We scrambled down the tree, sliding more than climbing, our boots tearing up the bark. We hit the ground, rifles shouldered, flashlights clicking on. The beams cut through the rain like lightsabers. I expected to see a monster raging. I expected death. I expected to have to shoot it before it climbed out and ripped us apart. We crept to the edge of the pit, aiming our lights downward. What I saw down there changed my DNA. It shattered everything I thought I knew about the world, about God, about evolution. The creature was huddled in the corner of the mud pit, clutching its knee. It was rocking back and forth. When the harsh LED light hit its face, it didn't snarl. It didn't bare fangs. It shielded its eyes. It held up a hand to block the light, a hand that looked remarkably, terrifyingly like mine. 5 fingers, a thumb, fingernails. Just bigger, covered in thick, black, leather-like skin. It peered through its fingers at us, and in those amber, saucer-sized eyes, I didn't see the blank aggression of a predator. I saw intelligence. I saw a soul. I saw a terrified, confused person who knew he was trapped. He was making soft, clicking sounds with his mouth like a language we couldn't speak. He looked from me to Miller, and then pointed at his injured leg. He was asking for help. "Jesus Christ," Miller whispered. His voice was shaking. "Jack, look at his face. Look at his damn face. It's a man." We were frozen there, standing on the precipice of madness, staring at a myth that was bleeding real blood into the mud. We were witnessing the impossible, but the trance was violently broken by a sound we knew better than our own heartbeats. A sound that pulled us right back to the rice paddies of 1972. Whoop, 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 whoop. Rotors. The air pressure dropped. The wind picked up, whipping the rain into a frenzy. A helicopter, low altitude, flying nap of the earth, hugging the tree line, running without navigation lights, blacked out. Miller grabbed my shoulder, his grip like a steel vise. He screamed over the sudden roar of the approaching engine. "They were tracking him, Jack. Don't you get it? The radio silence, the heat, they aren't looking for us. They're hunting him." A blinding spotlight from the chopper swept the trees about 200 yards east of us. They were grid searching, they were closing in. We had maybe 3 minutes before that light hit us. We had a choice. We could leave him there. We could run. We could let the Black Ops boys land, tranquilize the beast, slice him up in a lab, and erase the memory. It was the safe choice. Or we could do something insane. Miller didn't hesitate. He looked at the creature, then at the sky, then back at me. There was a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and slid down the muddy embankment, jumping straight into the pit with the monster. "Miller, no!" I screamed, reaching for him, but he was already down there. I thought he was dead. But Miller, he didn't attack. He just held up his hands, palms open. He approached the 8-foot titan the way you approach a frightened dog. He spoke to it in a voice I hadn't heard since he calmed down a panicked rookie in Da Nang. He looked the creature right in the eyes, ignoring the helicopter roaring overhead, and said, "Easy, big fella. We ain't the ones you need to worry about. But we gotta move. Now." The next 15 minutes were a blur of adrenaline and instinct. The sound of the helicopter rotors was deafening now, a rhythmic thumping that vibrated in my chest cavity. The spotlight was slicing through the trees like the eye of God, searching for sinners. It was close, maybe 400 yards and closing fast. I looked down into the pit. Miller was standing inches away from a creature that could snap his spine with a casual backhand. But the beast didn't strike. It was pressed against the muddy wall, its massive chest heaving. It was looking at Miller's hands, then up at the sky, then back at Miller. It was making a low, vibrating sound in its throat. Not a growl, but a frequency I could feel in the soles of my boots. It was fear, pure primal fear. "Jack, the winch!" Miller screamed, his voice cracking over the wind. "Get the damn winch hooked to the cedar! We have to pull him out! Now!" I snapped out of my paralysis. We had a heavy-duty worn winch mounted to the front of our old beat-up Jeep CJ7, which we'd parked about 50 yards up the trail to conceal it. But we couldn't bring the Jeep down here. The noise would give us away instantly. I had to improvise. I grabbed the heavy tow strap and the block and tackle system we used for hoisting elk carcasses. I ran to the nearest sturdy Douglas fir, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the carabiner. I lashed the strap around the trunk, creating an anchor point. I threw the other end down to Miller. "Tie it around his chest," I yelled down. "Under the arms." Miller approached the giant. This is the part that still haunts my dreams. The creature flinched. It raised a massive arm to defend itself. Miller didn't back down. He stepped closer. He touched the creature. He actually laid his hand on that wet, matted fur. "I got you," Miller said, his voice dropping to that calm, commanding tone he used when the world was falling apart. "I got you, but you gotta work with me, son." The creature lowered its arm. It let Miller loop the heavy yellow nylon strap under its armpits. The size of its torso was staggering. The strap barely reached around. It felt like trying to harness a grizzly bear that had spent 10 years lifting weights. The creature's skin was hot to the touch, radiating heat like a furnace. It smelled of musk, wet earth, and something strangely metallic like copper blood. "Ready," Miller yelled. I started pulling on the block and tackle. I'm a strong guy. I was stronger then, but the weight was immovable. It was like trying to pull a Volkswagen out of a swamp. "He's too heavy," I screamed, straining until I saw stars. Then, something incredible happened. The creature understood. It realized what we were trying to do. It planted its good leg into the mud, gritted its teeth, flat, human-like teeth, and pushed. It used its massive upper body strength to claw at the muddy embankment. With me pulling and the creature climbing, it surged upward. It crested the lip of the pit and collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for air. Seeing it in the open was even more shocking than seeing it in the hole. It was colossal. 8 feet, 6 inches, easily. 600 pounds of solid muscle, but we didn't have time to marvel at biology. The helicopter was right on top of us. Whup, 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 whup. The trees overhead whipped violently in the rotor wash. The spotlight hit the canopy directly above us, shattering into 1,000 beams of light through the branches. "Thermal," Miller barked. "They'll have FLIR. Cover him." We had emergency space blankets in our rucksacks, those shiny mylar sheets designed to reflect body heat. We ripped them open. I threw one over the creature's head and shoulders. Miller covered its legs. We threw our own ponchos over the mylar to hide the shine. Then we dove into the mud next to it, pulling brush and ferns over ourselves. We lay there, huddled against a prehistoric monster, praying to a god we weren't sure was watching. The creature was hyperventilating. I could feel its heart beating against my side, a slow, thunderous thump, 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 thump. It was terrified of the machine above. Instinctively, I reached out and put a hand on its shoulder, tapping a rhythm. "Stay down, stay down." The helicopter hovered. It sat right above us for what felt like an eternity. The spotlight swept the ground, missing us by feet. The wash blasted us with rain and debris. If they had thermal imaging, we looked like a confused blob of heat signatures. Maybe they thought we were a cluster of elk bedding down. Maybe the thick canopy scattered the signal. After 2 agonizing minutes, the pitch of the rotors changed. The nose of the chopper dipped and it banked west, continuing its grid search. Miller waited until the sound faded into the distance before he moved. He sat up, wiping mud from his eyes. He looked at the creature. The creature looked at him. The mylar blanket had slipped off its face. The expression wasn't animalistic rage. It was gratitude. It was the look a soldier gives his medic. "We can't leave him here," Miller said, breathing hard. "They'll circle back and he can't walk on that leg, it's shattered." "So what do we do?" I asked, looking at the 600-pound giant. "We can't carry him." Miller looked toward the jeep. "We don't carry him. We drag him. We use the sled." We had a heavy-duty plastic game sled, basically a glorified toboggan for hauling elk quarters. We ran to get it. Getting the creature onto the sled was a nightmare of physics. It groaned in pain as we maneuvered its massive frame, but it didn't fight us. It seemed to understand that the pain was the price of survival. It was intelligent. Scary intelligent. The trek back to the cabin was the longest 3 miles of my life. We couldn't use the main logging road because the helicopter might come back. We had to stick to the dense tree line. I drove the jeep in low gear. Lights off, creeping at 2 miles per hour, while Miller walked alongside the sled, stabilizing the creature, whispering to it constantly. Every bump in the ground elicited a sharp intake of breath from the beast. At one point the sled tipped, and the creature reached out and grabbed Miller's arm to steady itself. Miller didn't flinch. He just patted the massive, hairy hand. "Almost there," he muttered. "Almost home." We reached the cabin around 0430 hours. The rain was letting up, turning into a cold drizzle. We didn't take him inside the main house. Miller pointed to the old root cellar around the back. When Miller bought the property, he was paranoid about the Cold War heating up again. He'd spent 2 years and most of his savings retrofitting the root cellar into a legitimate fallout shelter. Concrete walls, reinforced steel door, independent ventilation system. He thought he was building it for World War III. Turns out he was building a prison cell for a refugee from the Pleistocene. Getting the creature down the concrete stairs was a disaster. Gravity took over. We slid, tumbled, and crashed onto the cold concrete floor of the bunker. The creature let out a howl of pain that I thought would wake the dead. I slammed the heavy steel door shut and spun the locking wheel. Clang, clang, click. Silence. Sudden, ringing silence. We were standing in the harsh light of the bunker's single fluorescent bulb. The air was stale and smelled of damp concrete. The creature was lying in the center of the room on the cold floor, breathing shallowly. Its leg was twisted at a sickening angle. I slumped against the door, sliding down until I hit the floor. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't unzip my jacket. I looked at Miller. He was leaning over the creature, examining the leg with the detached focus of a field surgeon. "It's a compound fracture," Miller said quietly. "Tib-fib. Nasty. If we don't set it, infection will kill him in 3 days." "Set it?" I laughed, a hysterical bubbling laugh that rose up from my chest. "Miller, look at what's on the floor. Look at it. We just kidnapped Bigfoot. We are currently harboring a federal fugitive. Or a monster. Or I don't even know what." Miller turned to me. His face was smeared with mud and blood. Some of it his, some of it the creature's. He looked old, tired, but his eyes were clear. "We didn't kidnap him, Jack," he said. "We rescued him. You saw that chopper. You saw the markings or the lack of them. If they found him, he'd be strapped to a metal table in Area 51 by sunrise, getting his brain vivisected while he was still awake." He looked back down at the creature. The beast had opened its eyes. It was watching Miller. It wasn't making a sound. It was just waiting, trusting. "We have to set the leg," Miller repeated. "Go upstairs. Get the morphine from the emergency kit. Get the splints. And get the chainsaw oil." "Chainsaw oil?" "To get the mud out of the wound," Miller said, his voice hard. "We're not hunters anymore, Jack. We're corpsmen. And this is our patient." I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I looked at the creature one last time before heading up the stairs. It shifted its gaze from Miller to me. It blinked slowly. It was a gesture so human, so disarmingly gentle, that it broke my heart. I realized then that there was no going back. The life we knew, the quiet retirement, the fishing trips, the solitude, it was over. We were guardians now, jailers. I climbed the stairs to get the morphine, leaving my best friend alone in a concrete box with a legend. The first night in the bunker wasn't a night of sleep. It was a night of blood and prayer. We had a 600-pound patient with a shattered tibia, a fever spiking, and enough adrenaline in his system to kill a horse. We had to operate. Miller had been a medic in the Corps before he switched to recon. He knew trauma. He knew how to patch up a 19-year-old kid who stepped on a bouncing Betty. But he didn't know this physiology. We had 10 ampules of morphine in our emergency kit. For a human, 2 would knock you out. For this Titan, we had to guess. "Give him 4, Miller said, rolling up his sleeves. "If we give him too much, his heart stops. If we give him too little, the pain wakes him up when I set the bone and he thrashes. If he thrashes in this small room, Jack, he kills us both by accident." I loaded the syringe. My hands were sweating. I approached the creature. He was lying on the concrete, breathing shallow, ragged breaths. His eyes were open, tracking me. I knelt beside his massive shoulder. I held up the needle so he could see it. I didn't want to surprise him. "Just a little sting, buddy," I whispered, "just to help you sleep." He didn't flinch when the needle pierced his skin, which was tough, like cured leather. He just watched me. Within 5 minutes, his eyelids grew heavy. His breathing slowed. His head lolled to the side. "Okay," Miller said. "Grab the ankle. On 3 we pull. We have to align the bone before we splint it." I grabbed the ankle. It was as thick as a telephone pole. 1, 2, 3. We pulled. The sound of the bone grinding back into place was a wet, sickening crunch that echoed off the concrete walls. The creature's body convulsed. A low, guttural moan escaped his lips, vibrating through the floor into my knees. But he didn't wake up. We worked fast. We cleaned the wound with saline and betadine, packed it with sterile gauze, and splinted the leg using 2 pieces of scrap lumber and a roll of duct tape. We spent the next 3 weeks living in that bunker. We didn't see the sun. We took turns sleeping in a folding chair by the door, rifle across our laps, watching him. That's when we named him. It was the 2nd week. The fever had set in. He was delirious, thrashing in his sleep, muttering in a language of clicks, whistles, and deep chest rumbles. Miller was wiping his forehead with a wet rag. The creature suddenly grabbed Miller's wrist. Not to crush it, but to hold it. He looked at Miller with hazy, feverish eyes, but there was a dignity there, a stoic, commanding presence even in his weakest moment. "He looks like General Patton," Miller muttered, trying to pull his hand away gently. "Stubborn old bastard, refuses to die." "The general," I said. It fit. He wasn't a monster. He was a deposed king, a general without an army. The hardest part wasn't the medical care, it was the hunger. You have no idea how much calories a creature of that size burns just by existing. When the fever broke and he woke up properly, he was starving. We emptied our pantry in 2 days. Canned peaches, Spam, dried venison, bags of rice, he ate it all. We realized we had a logistical nightmare on our hands. We couldn't just go to the local grocery store and buy 500 pounds of meat without raising eyebrows in a small town like ours. People talk, "Hey Jack, why you buying enough beef to feed a platoon?" So, we became poachers. That winter was brutal. We hunted every day. Elk, deer, wild turkey. We didn't take trophies. We didn't take pictures. We were purely meat hunters. We'd dress the kills in the field, pack the meat into the Jeep, and drive it back under the cover of darkness. We felt like criminals. In a way, we were. We were violating every game law in the state. But we had a mouth to feed that could swallow a whole chicken in 2 bites. The general was a polite eater. That surprised me. He didn't tear into the meat like a wolf. He used his hands. He picked bones clean with precision. And he always left a small piece of meat on the floor near the door. An offering, a gesture of thanks. By December, the leg was healing. The general could hobble around the bunker. This was the dangerous time. He was getting his strength back. He was 600 pounds of apex predator in a 20 by 20 concrete box. If he wanted to leave, that steel door wouldn't hold him. If he wanted to kill us, our rifles wouldn't be fast enough. But he didn't want to leave. Not yet. He seemed to understand the situation better than we did. Whenever a plane flew over the cabin, which happened often as we were near a flight path, the general would freeze. He would look at the ceiling, his ears twitching, his body tense. He knew what was out there. He knew he was being hunted. He knew the bunker wasn't a cage. It was a sanctuary. We started to communicate. It wasn't English, obviously. It was gesture and tone. I remember the breakthrough. It was Christmas Eve, 1987. I was down in the bunker on the night shift. I was cleaning my rifle, stripping the bolt carrier group. The general was sitting in the corner on a pile of old blankets we'd given him. He was watching me intently. He reached out a long, dark finger and tapped the steel barrel of the rifle. Then he made a sound. Pop, pop. He mimicked the sound of a gunshot. I looked at him. Yeah, gun, boom. He shook his huge head. He tapped the gun again, then pointed to the door, then pointed to himself. He made a cutting motion across his throat. I froze. He wasn't asking what the gun was, he was asking if I was going to use it on him. I set the rifle down on the floor, far away from me. I held up my empty hands. I looked him in the eye. No, I said firmly. No. Friends. We are friends. I tapped my chest. Jack. I pointed to the empty chair where Miller usually sat. Miller. I pointed to him. General. He stared at me for a long time. His amber eyes, which usually reflected light like a cat's, seemed to soften. He slowly raised his hand and tapped his own massive chest. General, he rumbled. He tried to mimic the sound. General. Then he reached into the pile of blankets and pulled out something he'd been hiding. It was a piece of wood, a scrap of 2x4 lumber from the splint we had removed. He had been gnawing on it, or so I thought. He handed it to me. It wasn't gnawed, it was carved. He had used his thumbnails, which were thick and sharp as chisels, to carve the wood. It was crude but undeniable. It was a shape. It looked like a bird, a raptor in flight. I held the little wooden bird in my hand, staring at it until my vision blurred with tears. This wasn't an animal. Animals don't make art. Animals don't understand the concept of a gift. Thank you, I whispered. The general nodded once, then curled up on his blankets and went to sleep. That night, I went upstairs and poured myself a triple whiskey. Miller was awake, listening to the police scanner, paranoid as always. He made this, I said, putting the wooden bird on the table between us. Miller picked it up. He turned it over in his calloused hands. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at it, his jaw tight. We can never let them find him, Jack, Miller said finally. His voice was grim. If the government finds out he can do this, if they find out he has a soul, they won't just study him. They'll weaponize him. Or they'll torture him to find out where the rest of them are. Miller looked at me, and I saw the weight of the future settling on his shoulders. We're in this for life, he said. You know that, right? There's no parole for us. We keep him safe until he dies, or until we die. I nodded. I poured Miller a drink. We toasted to our prisoner, to our friend, to the general. We thought we knew what we were doing. We thought we could manage it. But we didn't account for the curiosity of the outside world. And we certainly didn't account for what happens when a creature like the general hits maturity. Because what we had in that bunker wasn't just a man-ape. It was a transmitter. And he was starting to broadcast. Time changes you. In the jungle, a year felt like a decade. But in the cabin, time blurred into a gray, monotonous loop. 1987 turned into 1990. 1990 bled into 1994. The Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union collapsed. The world outside was changing, but our world, Miller's and mine, had shrunk to the size of a 20 by 20 concrete box. By the summer of '94, the general had fully recovered, and he had changed. The lanky, starving creature we pulled from the pit was gone. In his place was a 9-foot titan of pure muscle. His fur had thickened, turning a silver-tipped gray across his massive shoulders. He wasn't just surviving in the bunker, he was dominating it. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was atmospheric. It started in July. A heat wave had hit the Cascades, turning the forest into a tinderbox. The air was thick and still. Miller and I were sitting on the porch, sweating through our shirts, cleaning our rifles out of habit. That's when we felt it. It wasn't a sound. Not at first. It was a pressure, a heaviness in the center of my chest, like I was standing in front of a massive subwoofer at a rock concert, but with the volume turned down. The coffee in my mug started to ripple. Rings of vibration appeared on the surface of the black liquid. Earthquake? I asked, putting my hand on the table to steady it. Miller shook his head. He looked pale. He was rubbing his temples. No. No quake. My head feels like it's in a vice. You feel that nausea? I did. A sudden rolling wave of sickness in my gut. And dread. A deep, irrational feeling of panic, like someone was watching me from the shadows. The dogs, Miller had 2 new coonhounds, Buster and Blue, started losing their minds. They didn't bark. They whined, tails tucked so far between their legs they were practically touching their stomachs. They scrambled under the porch and refused to come out. "It's coming from downstairs," Miller whispered. We grabbed our keys and the tranquilizer gun, a modification we had made over the years just in case, and headed for the bunker. The air in the stairwell was vibrating. I could feel it in my teeth. When I spun the wheel and opened the steel door, the pressure wave hit us like a physical blow. The general was standing in the center of the room. He wasn't looking at us. He was facing the north wall, his head tilted back, his eyes closed. His chest was expanding and contracting in a rhythmic, powerful motion. He was making a sound, but it was below the threshold of human hearing. Infrasound. It was the same frequency tigers use to paralyze prey, but amplified by a factor of 10. "General," Miller shouted, covering his ears, "stop, you're hurting us." The general stopped. He opened his eyes and looked at us. The pressure vanished instantly. The nausea lifted. He looked sad. He pointed at the ceiling, then at the north wall. He made a soft, mournful cooing sound. "Whoo-oop." "He's calling," Miller said, realization dawning on his face. "He's lonely, Jack. He's calling out." "Calling out to who?" I asked, rubbing my ringing ears. "He's under 10 feet of concrete and dirt. Nothing can hear that." Miller looked at me grimly. "Whales can communicate across entire oceans with infrasound. Elephants can talk to each other from miles away. We don't know the range on this guy. If he's broadcasting, we have a problem. We had a bigger problem than we thought." The general wasn't just calling into the void. Something was listening. 2 days later, the sheriff showed up. Sheriff Big Tom Henderson was a good man, but he was nosy. He'd known Miller since high school. When his cruiser crunch rolled up our gravel driveway, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We had a protocol for this. Routine. Be boring. Deny everything. I met him on the porch. I didn't invite him inside. "Afternoon, Jack," Tom said, stepping out of the car. He adjusted his belt. He looked uneasy. He wasn't wearing his usual smile. "Is Miller around?" "He's out back, fixing the water pump," I lied. Miller was actually downstairs, sitting with the general to keep him calm, needle loaded in case the dog barked. "What can I do for you, Tom?" Tom took off his hat and wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked at the woods surrounding the cabin. He looked nervous. "We've been getting calls, Jack. Weird calls. Folks down in the valley, the Andersons, the old man Jenkins' place. They say their livestock is acting crazy. Horses trying to kick down stalls, cows breaking fences, and people, they're reporting headaches, migraines. Waking up in the middle of the night terrified for no reason." I kept my face like stone. "Heatwave does crazy things to people, Tom." "Maybe," Tom said. He squinted at me. "But there's something else. We had a hiker reported missing yesterday. Some kid from Portland. His car is parked at the trailhead 3 miles east of here. Search and rescue is coming up tomorrow with dogs." My blood ran cold. Search and rescue meant grid searches. It meant helicopters. It meant people swarming the woods. "Hope you find him," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom leaned against the porch railing. "Here's the thing, Jack. The deputies were up there this morning. They found tracks, weird tracks, big ones. But they don't look like bear. And they found markers." "Markers?" "Trees snapped in half," Tom said. 10 feet up. Snapped clean, then shoved upside down into the ground, like some kind of warning sign. "You two are deep in the bush out here. You seen anything? You heard anything?" I looked Tom in the eye. It was the hardest lie I ever told. "Not a thing, Tom. Just the wind." Tom stared at me for a long beat. He knew I was holding something back. He was a cop. He could smell secrets like a shark smells blood, but he didn't have probable cause. "All right," Tom said, putting his hat back on. "Tell Miller to keep his radio on. If this kid is out there, we might need his tracking skills." "Will do." As Tom drove away, I ran to the backyard. I practically fell down the bunker stairs. Miller was pacing. The general was sitting on his bed, rocking back and forth, agitated. "Search and rescue is coming," I told Miller, breathless. "Tomorrow, dogs, choppers, and Tom said there are markers in the woods, tree structures." Miller stopped pacing. He went white. "Tree structures?" "Yeah, upside-down trees, warning signs." Miller looked at the general. "He wasn't calling for help, Jack. He wasn't crying because he was lonely." Miller walked over to the map of the county pinned to the wall. He traced a line from the Devil's Staircase, where we caught him, to our cabin. "He was broadcasting a location," Miller whispered. "And the markers, those aren't from him. He's been locked in here." I felt the room spin. "Then who made them?" Miller turned to me, his eyes full of a terrifying realization. "The others. The tribe. They heard him, Jack. They know he's alive, and they're coming to get him." We weren't jailers anymore. We were under siege. That night we didn't sleep. We turned off all the lights in the cabin. We sat by the windows with our rifles, watching the tree line. The infrasound had stopped, but something worse had replaced it. Silence. The forest was completely silent. No crickets, no owls, no wind. Around 2 hours I saw it. Just a shadow. A massive, darker than black shape moving between the trees at the edge of the clearing. Then another. Then a third. They were watching the house. I nudged Miller. 3:00, by the old oak. Miller raised his night vision scope, a piece of illegal surplus gear he'd acquired. He looked through it. He didn't fire. He just lowered the rifle slowly. "What is it?" I hissed. "It's a female," Miller whispered, "and a juvenile. They aren't attacking, Jack, they're waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For us to make a mistake." We were trapped. If we let the general go, the government, who was surely monitoring the search and rescue channels, might swoop in. If we kept him, his family might tear the cabin down to get to him. And in the middle of all this, an innocent hiker was missing, probably taken by the tribe as leverage. We were sitting on a powder keg and the fuse was burning down fast. We had to make a decision that would lead to the most dangerous night of our lives. The standoff lasted for 3 hours. 3 hours of absolute suffocating silence. The kind of silence where you can hear the blood rushing in your own ears. We were sitting in the dark living room, rifles resting on the windowsills, watching the tree line. The shapes out there hadn't moved. They were statues made of shadow darker than the night itself, just watching, waiting. "They have the high ground," Miller whispered, not taking his eye off the scope. "They have superior numbers, and they have night vision better than this surplus junk I'm using. If they decide to breach, Jack, we're dead in 30 seconds. "They won't breach," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "If they wanted us dead, they would have ripped the roof off while we were sleeping. They want him." Miller lowered his rifle. He looked at the floorboards beneath which the general was pacing in his cell. "We have to bring him up." I looked at him like he was insane. "Bring him up?" "Miller, he's a 9-foot-tall biological tank. If we bring him up here and he sees his family, he's going to go through that front door. And once he's out there, the sheriff finds him. Then the feds find him. Then it's over." "It's over anyway if we don't," Miller snapped, the stress finally cracking his voice. "Think about it. The sheriff is coming back at dawn with dogs. If that tribe is still out there, the dogs will scent them. All hell breaks loose. A firefight. People die. The general gets discovered. We go to prison for treason. This is a foobar situation, Jack. We need to de-escalate. Now." He was right. As usual. We went down to the bunker. The general was waiting for us. He wasn't pacing anymore. He was standing by the door, his massive hands resting on the steel frame. He knew. He could probably smell them through the ventilation shafts. Miller didn't unlock the door immediately. He looked through the viewing slit. "General," Miller said, his voice firm but respectful. "Your family is outside, but the bad men, the Sky People, are coming too. If you go with your family now, the Sky People will find you. You understand?" The general stared at Miller. He made a low, rumbling sound. He tapped his chest, then pointed upstairs. "I'm going to open the door," Miller said, "but you have to listen to me. No running. We talk. We make them leave, okay?" I unlocked the heavy steel bolts. Clank, clank. The door swung open. The general had to duck to get through the doorway. In the confined space of the stairwell, his size was overwhelming. He smelled of ozone and musk, the scent of pure power. He walked up the stairs, the wood groaning under his weight. We walked into the living room. The general moved to the center of the room and stopped. He looked at the window. He let out a breath that fogged up the glass. "Open the front door, Jack," Miller said. "Are you sure? Open it." I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the front door wide open. The night air rushed in. The general stepped out onto the porch. Miller and I stood behind him, rifles low, feeling like children standing in the shadow of a god. The reaction from the woods was immediate. A low, vibrating thrum filled the air, the infrasound return signal, then movement. From the shadows of the old oak tree, a figure emerged. It was the female. She was smaller than the general, maybe 7 feet tall, with reddish-brown fur and a leaner build. Behind her, a younger male, maybe a teenager in their terms, peered out nervously. The female stepped into the moonlight. She didn't look at us. Her eyes were locked on the general. She made a sound, a high-pitched, bird-like trill. "Whoop, whoop," the general responded. He raised his arms, palms open. He wasn't greeting them with joy. He was commanding them. He barked a series of guttural sounds, deep and sharp. "Oorah, Gurkha." The female stopped. She looked confused. She took a step forward, reaching out a hand. The general roared. It wasn't a scream like the day we caught him. It was a roar of authority. A silverback asserting dominance. He pointed a massive finger at the sky, mimicking the spinning rotors of a helicopter. Then he pointed at the bunker under the house. Then he pointed at the woods and made a sweeping, go-away motion. He was telling them to leave. He was telling them that he was staying because it was the only way to keep them safe. The female looked at him, then at Miller and me. Her eyes were intelligent, judging. She seemed to weigh the situation. She looked at the sky, understanding the threat. She lowered her head in a gesture of submission, but then she did something that stopped my heart. She turned to the juvenile behind her and barked a command. The young Sasquatch disappeared into the brush. A moment later, he returned, dragging something. It was a body. "Oh God," I whispered, raising my rifle. "They killed the hiker." Miller put a hand on my barrel, pushing it down. "Wait, look." The juvenile dragged the body to the edge of the clearing and left it there. Then both Sasquatches backed away, fading into the tree line like smoke. The general stood on the porch for a long moment, watching them go. He let out a long, shuddering sigh. He turned to us, his face a mask of sorrow. He touched Miller's shoulder gently, then turned and walked back into the house, heading straight for the bunker stairs. He was returning to his cell, voluntarily. We ran to the clearing. The hiker was a kid, maybe 20 years old. He was unconscious, wrapped in a strange cocoon of woven vines and moss. I checked for a pulse. "He's alive," I said, relief washing over me. "Pulse is strong. He's just out cold." Miller examined the kid. No visible wounds, no broken bones, but look at his pupils when I shine the light. Dilated. They drugged him. Drugged him? Some kind of plant toxin, Miller surmised. Maybe to keep him quiet, or maybe Maybe they were keeping him as a trade. A hostage for the general. "We have to stage this," Miller said, his mind already switching to tactical mode. "We can't let the sheriff know the tribe brought him here." We worked fast. We carried the kid about a mile down the old logging road, away from the cabin, to a ravine where he could have plausibly fallen and knocked himself out. We laid him down, messed up the brush to look like a slide. Miller looked at me. "We call it in anonymously. Payphone in town. We saw lights, thought we heard shouting." "And the tribe?" I asked, looking back at the dark woods. "They're gone," Miller said. "The general gave them an order. They won't come back. He saved us, Jack. He saved the kid. And he saved us." We drove back to the cabin in silence. When we got back, I went down to the bunker to lock the door. The general was sitting on his bed, holding that little wooden bird he had carved. He looked up at me. I didn't lock the door. I left the heavy steel bolts open, just slightly. He knew he couldn't leave, and I knew he wouldn't. The lock was just a formality now. We weren't captors and prisoner anymore. We were allies in a war against the world. But wars have casualties. And as the years went on, the cost of keeping the secret started to rot us from the inside out. Miller started drinking. I started seeing black helicopters even when the sky was empty. And the general? He started waiting. Because he knew something we didn't. He knew that biology has an expiration date. And he knew that the hardest day wasn't the day we caught him. It would be the day we had to say goodbye. They say time heals all wounds, but that's a lie. Time just gives the infection more room to spread. The decades blurred together. The 90s ended. The towers fell in New York. The wars started again in the sandbox. Presidents changed. Technology changed. The world got faster, louder, and meaner. But in our little pocket of the Cascades, time stood still. We were trapped in 1987 guarding a relic. We got old. That's the hard truth. Miller's hands, once steady enough to thread a needle in a storm, started to shake with tremors. His knees gave out. He spent more time in his armchair, staring at the security monitors, muttering about satellites and thermal grids. He wasn't paranoid anymore, he was just right. And the general? He got old too. Sasquatches, it turns out, aged just like us. His fur, once a lustrous dark brown, turned completely silver, then a patchy white. His movement slowed. The fluid hydraulic power that allowed him to snap trees was gone, replaced by the stiff, grinding shuffle of arthritis. We had to modify the bunker. We built a ramp because he couldn't manage the stairs anymore. We changed his diet. He couldn't chew raw venison like he used to. His teeth were worn down to the gum line. So 2 old Marines found themselves stewing vegetables and grinding meat for a 700-pound apex predator. We were a nursing home for monsters. But the real enemy wasn't age. It was technology. In the 80s, the woods were dark. If you didn't have a flashlight, you were blind. But by 2020, the dark didn't exist anymore. Everyone had a supercomputer in their pocket. Everyone was a filmmaker. Hikers carried 4K cameras. Hunters used trail cams with cellular uplinks that sent photos instantly to their phones. Google Earth mapped every inch of our property from space. We had to work twice as hard to stay hidden. We hung camo netting over the bunker entrance. We installed infrared jammers. We stopped hunting during the day entirely. We became ghosts. But you can't hide from everything. It happened last September. A clear, crisp Tuesday. Miller was napping. I was in the garden trying to pull weeds with my bad back. Then I heard it. Tssst. It wasn't the heavy whoop-whoop of a helicopter. It was a high-pitched, angry whine, like a mechanical hornet. I looked up. Hovering about 50 feet above the cabin was a drone, a quadcopter, white plastic, blinking green lights, camera gimbal swiveling like a robotic eye. It wasn't a government drone. It was a consumer toy, probably some kid from the new housing development down in the valley testing his range. But that camera, it was pointing right at the backyard. Right at the bunker entrance where I had just left the heavy steel door open to let some fresh air in for the general. The general was sitting just inside the doorway in the shadows. If that camera had a decent sensor, it could see him. It could see the silver fur, the massive shape. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. "Miller!" I screamed, running for the porch. Miller was already awake. He stumbled out the screen door, his eyes wild. He didn't ask questions. He heard the whine. He saw the drone. He raised his old 12-gauge shotgun. "Don't shoot," I yelled. "If you shoot it, the owner will know. They have GPS." Miller didn't listen. He didn't care about consequences. He only cared about the mission. Boom. The shotgun blast shattered the afternoon silence. The drone exploded in a puff of plastic and circuitry. It tumbled out of the sky, crashing onto the roof of the woodshed. Silence returned. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a bomb that had just armed itself. Miller lowered the gun. He was shaking violently. His face was gray. "Go get it," he wheezed. "Get the SD card. Destroy it." I grabbed a ladder and scrambled onto the shed roof. My hands were trembling as I pried the broken drone apart. I found the little black memory card. I pulled it out. I crushed it between two rocks until it was dust. Then I burned the plastic wreckage in the wood stove. We destroyed the evidence. But we didn't know if the video had been live-streamed. We didn't know if the kid was watching on his phone screen as a crazy old man shot his toy out of the sky. That night, Miller had his first episode. He collapsed in the kitchen, clutching his chest. I got him to the couch. I wanted to call 911, but he grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "No ambulance," he gasped. "No strangers. Not while he is downstairs." "Miller, you're having a heart attack," I pleaded. "Let me die here, Jack," he whispered. "I ain't going to a hospital. I'm staying on the watch." He survived that night, but something in him broke. The stress of the drone, the fear of exposure. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. For the last 6 months, he was a shadow. He stopped eating. He spent his nights staring out the window, muttering about the agency and black ops. And the general knew. Down in the bunker, the old creature could feel the change. He stopped eating too. He would sit by the ventilation grate, listening to Miller's labored breathing upstairs. He would make soft morning sounds. He was grieving for his friend before his friend was even dead. 3 days ago, Miller didn't wake up. I found him in the armchair facing the window, his rifle across his lap. He looked peaceful. The watch was over for him. But for me, the nightmare was just beginning. Because yesterday, while I was digging Miller's grave in the soft earth behind the cabin, illegal, I know, but where else could I put him? I saw a car drive slowly past the front gate. It wasn't a sheriff, it wasn't a local. It was a black SUV. Tinted windows, government plates. They stopped. They took pictures. Then they drove on. They know Miller is dead. They probably monitor the vital records, or maybe they just watched the obituary column. They know the property is vulnerable. The probate laws say the land goes up for auction if there's no will. And Miller, paranoid bastard that he was, never wrote a will because he didn't want his name in the system. The clock has run out. I'm alone here. I'm 82 years old. I have a dead body in the backyard, a dying monster in the basement, and the federal government circling like vultures. I went down to see the general this morning. I told him. "Miller is gone," I said. He looked at me with those ancient, cloudy, amber eyes. He reached out and touched my face. His hand was trembling, just like Miller's used to. He knew. He pointed to the door, not the bunker door, the outside door. He stood up, groaning with the effort. He stretched his massive, stiff frame. He looked at me, and for the first time in 30 years, I saw the warrior return. The spark was back. He doesn't want to die in a cage, Jack. He wants to go home. And I have one last mission. I have to get him past the SUVs, past the drones, and back to the Devil's Staircase. I have to get him to the extraction point. Tonight is the night. The storm is coming in. Heavy rain, high winds, no drones, no thermal. It's a suicide mission. I know that. But what else am I going to do? Play bingo? I'm loading the truck. I'm loading the rifles. And I'm opening the cage. The storm hit at midnight just as the weatherman predicted. It was a Pacific Northwest classic, a deluge that turned the dirt roads into rivers of mud and bent the pines until they snapped. Perfect cover. Getting the general out of the bunker was the hardest physical thing I have ever done. It wasn't just the weight, it was the fragility. We were two old men, one human, one myth, trying to climb a concrete ramp. He leaned on me, his massive arm draped over my shoulders, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. He smelled of old dust and sickness now. The ozone scent faded to a memory. I backed my 1978 Ford F-250 up to the cellar doors. I had removed the camper shell earlier. I laid down a mattress in the bed and covered it with a heavy canvas tarp. "Come on, old friend," I grunted, my boots slipping in the mud. "One last push." He climbed into the truck bed with a groan that sounded terrifyingly human. He curled up on the mattress, shielding his face from the stinging rain. I threw the tarp over him, tying it down with bungee cords. To anyone passing by, it just looked like a load of firewood or debris. I climbed into the cab. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. I looked at the empty seat beside me. I wished Miller was here. He would have been riding shotgun, checking the mirrors, making wisecracks about my driving. But the seat was empty. It was just me. I put the truck in gear and rolled down the driveway. The black SUVs were there, two of them parked on the shoulder of the county road, lights off. As I pulled out, their headlights flickered on. My heart hammered against my ribs. If they stopped me now, it was over. I had Miller's .45 on the seat beside me, but I knew I wouldn't use it. I wasn't going to die in a shootout. I drove past them, keeping my speed steady. I didn't look at them. I stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. They didn't move. They didn't follow. Maybe they thought I was just an old man making a run to the hospital. Maybe they were waiting for a warrant. Or maybe, just maybe, they wanted me to lead them to something. I checked the rearview mirror every 10 seconds for the next hour. No lights, just the endless black curtain of the storm. The drive to Devil's Staircase took 2 hours. It should have taken 40 minutes, but the logging roads were washed out, and I had to navigate around fallen trees. The general was quiet in the back. Too quiet. We arrived at the trailhead around 0300 hours, the exact same time we had arrived 38 years ago. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. I killed the engine. The silence of the forest rushed back in, heavy and wet. I got out and untied the tarp. The general was awake. He was looking up at the trees. The rain was matting his white fur, but he didn't seem to mind. He inhaled deeply, tasting the air. This was his home. The air here smelled different, wilder, cleaner. He tried to stand up, but his legs gave out. He collapsed back onto the mattress, letting out a soft whimper. "No, no, no," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. "Don't you quit on me now. We're here. We're at the finish line." I lowered the tailgate. I climbed in and grabbed his arm. "Up. You have to get up." He looked at me. His eyes were milky with cataracts, but he saw me. He reached out and touched the tears running down my face. He made a low, rumbling sound. It wasn't a groan of pain. It was a comfort. He summoned every ounce of strength he had left. He rolled, planted his feet, and pushed. I pulled. We tumbled out of the truck and onto the muddy ground. He stood up. He swayed like a drunk, but he stood. He was back on earth, not concrete. He turned toward the canyon, the deep, dark ravine where we had dug that pit so long ago. He took a breath. His chest expanded, his ribs straining against his thinning fur. He didn't roar. He didn't scream. He hummed. It was the infrasound. I felt it hit my chest like a physical wave, stronger than I had felt in years. He was pouring his life force into one last signal. A beacon. I am here. I am home. I am dying. The vibration lasted for a full minute. Then, his legs buckled. He fell to his knees, then to his side. I sat in the mud beside him. I lifted his heavy head and placed it on my lap. I stroked his wet fur. "It's okay," I whispered. "You did it. You called them." We sat there in the rain for 20 minutes. His breathing got shallower. The space between the breaths got longer. I realized then that I wasn't waiting for a rescue. I was waiting for the end. But then, the forest changed. The rain didn't stop, but the wind died. The birds stopped singing. The silence returned. From the tree line, shadows detached themselves from the darkness. First one, then 3, then 10. They didn't walk. They glided. Massive shapes, darker than the night. They formed a circle around the truck. I should have been terrified. I was an old man surrounded by a tribe of apex predators. But I felt no fear, only awe. A large male, bigger than the general had ever been, stepped forward. His fur was jet black. He looked at me. He didn't bare his teeth. He looked at the dying elder in my lap, and then he looked me in the eye. He nodded. A slow, solemn nod of recognition. He knelt down. Gently, with a tenderness that defied his size, he slid his arms under the general. Another male stepped in to take the legs. They lifted him. The general opened his eyes one last time. He looked at the black alpha. Then he looked at me. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just closed his eyes and let out a long, final exhale. The tribe turned as one. They carried him into the deep timber, moving silently into the canyon. They didn't look back. Within seconds, they were gone. The forest swallowed them whole. I was alone. I sat in the mud for a long time, staring at the empty space where my friend had been. I felt lighter. The secret was gone. The burden was lifted. I stood up, my knees cracking. I got back in the truck. I didn't drive home. There was no home to go back to. Miller was dead. The general was gone. The cabin was just wood and nails. I grabbed the cassette recorder from the dashboard. I hit the stop button.